To begin at the beginning, you could walk out of this studio, and I say this having just met your one-year-old son, who's accompanied you today. You could, when you go downstairs, encounter Home Office staff or Border Patrol staff who could arrest you and take you immediately to a detention centre.
That is absolutely correct, Jamie. It is that, sad for me, really, and frightening for me that, I am very exposed and vulnerable. And so is my family as a whole, that, they could potentially lose, having a father, a husband at home, any moment from now, really.
This is because, and we talk about Brexit a lot on this programme, and a lot of people who voted for Brexit will be utterly unaware of the 2007 Act, which empowers the government to deport anybody who's been imprisoned here for more than 12 months. Any foreign national is subject to automatic deportation if they've been sentenced to imprisonment for 12 months or more. So we better address why you have been imprisoned for 12 months or more.
Sure. In 2011, I was working on my own project, which was a transformation project, really, to help the DWP and the Job Centre to help young people who were from disadvantaged backgrounds back into employment. So during the time at which I was delivering this program, a cousin of mine, a relative of mine, was also working on his own private venture, which was to buy, cars that had been involved in slight accidents, fixing them up, and then selling them on. I gave him complete, and I take personal responsibility for this. I was naive, I was stupid. I was at a very low point in my life whereby, I wasn't thinking straight, and I gave full consent and power of attorney for him to actually act on my behalf as the company director, in essence. And unfortunately, what happened was he was actually forging fake invoices and claiming VAT back from HMRC, of which, ultimately he owned up to it. I wasn't aware of what he was doing, but as company house rules are set and fixed, the buck stops with me, and I take full responsibility for that.
And that was 2 years and 3 months, of which you served 15.
Correct.
You came here from Nigeria with your parents, who both have British citizenship.
That's correct.
When you were 10, you lived in South London ever since. Do you have links back in Nigeria? Do you still have family there? When did you last visit?
2004 for a couple of weeks, and we returned, and I haven't been back since. Any relatives I did have there, have since passed away. So my grandmother and my grandfather have passed on since. My siblings are here. My mother's here. My stepfather. Indeed, my wife, who's British born, and children who are British born are all here. I've been here since primary school. So, you can imagine the life I've built for myself and the ties I have to the UK and not to Nigeria, surely not to Nigeria.
Of course, and it's worth pointing out that while you were in prison, you got heavily involved in various charities, or in various, the radio station chiefly, but since leaving, it's the charity work that you've been doing. You've been visiting schools to deter people from offending. You've become a relatively tireless prison reformer. You're here today partly because my friend, the journalist Miranda Sawyer, has taken such an interest in your case after meeting you when she was writing about National Prison Radio, which is one of those schemes and ideas that helps people in prison prepare themselves for a life of law-abiding outside prison.
As soon as I went into prison in 2013, one of the first things I needed to do was address my decision-making and choice-making issues, because, as I said, what led up to my crime in the first place was because, I lost all sort of faculties of reasoning and trust, and I had big trust issues. So sure. I did numerous courses. Whilst I was also in prison, I worked for another charity organisation called Keep Out, which was a crime prevention, a crime diversion scheme that brought young people through young offenders institutions, pupil referral units into schools, into prisons, and we, as 7 prisons at a time, would deliver a whole day workshop to try and basically show them that, look, the slightest mistake, you could be the most law-abiding citizen, but all it takes is one wrong choice, one wrong move, which could basically, in essence, land you in prison.
And if you'd sort of, I mean, if the paperwork had unfolded differently, you would have had your citizenship established when your parents did as well.
Absolutely. I was entitled,
but you didn't. So you're in a way you're the victim of small print or bad luck as much as you're a victim of bureaucracy. You won your first appeal, so you come out of prison. We told more or less straight away that you were facing a deportation order?
Correct.
Because you are still a foreign national and you'd serve 15 months. So you appeal that, presumably with a bit of confidence, given that you have lived here since you were 10. It was a white collar crime. So the idea that you would pose a threat to society upon your release is hard to sustain, and even harder when they look at the charity work that you've done. So when you went to that first appeal, I presume you thought you were going to walk it, did you, or not? Well, I know there's fear.
Sure, no, of course there's always fear. There's always that anxious moments that someone might just read the surface of my index offence and not actually go into the details of what perhaps led to that offence and the exceptional circumstances about my case, which makes it unique and therefore fits into the Home Office's own exceptional.
Yeah. Okay. So that's why you won the appeal, but they took you back to tribunal.
Correct. The upper tribunal.
And you lost.
And I lost that. Correct. The Home Office appealed the decision from the first tier tribunal, and I lost that upper tribunal. Basically on the basis that the judge felt that there was an error in the law, in the lower court's decision making. I appealed that. It went up to the Court of Appeal, and the Court of Appeal basically said that both judges had discretions and therefore exercised their discretions, and that was the end of that. And I put in a fresh application on the grounds that my family circumstances have changed.
Yes.
My wife.
Your wife's not very well. Social workers' reports have been compiled on your children.
Absolutely.
They've suggested to you that you would be able to exercise pastoral care for your children over Skype.
That's correct. So the Home Office's idea is that sufficient fatherly figure can be provided using various means of social media such as Skype and WhatsApp, which for me is very scary, because when you look at where I come from, and I believe I come from Brixton, young black boys, and I've got two of them, are more susceptible to gang culture, antisocial behavior, poor in schools, and that's not always the case. I should say that. Of
course, no, but the narrative is well established, and you're also arguing that the system should take into account the stuff that you've done since leaving prison, or the stuff that you did in prison, because in the notion of citizenship,
correct,
there's no room at all for that in the current.
There isn't, and it's rather unfortunate that the Home Office has adopted a one-size-fits-all sort of approach. It's not forgiving at all. It's almost inhumane at times, in how it deals with cases, and there needs to be a certain measure of justice being tempered with mercy as well, because if you take into consideration the fact that I came in when I was young, lived here my whole life, that apart from the index offence being my only offence,
yes, I do understand, and I know that. Life. I've met your little boy. He's gorgeous, but I can't quite imagine. During Windrush, we spoke to people as the Windrush scandal emerged, who were sort of every time the doorbell rang, there'd be that frisson of fear. Does that describe
Jamie,
you?
that is so real. Yeah. That is literally real. I'm constantly on the edge. I've got high blood pressure, anxious. I'm on 3 sets of medication, to control my...
And so what happens next, Hilary?
So what happens next is, I'm currently on immigration bail.
Yes.
Which means...
So you have to report to the Home Office later today?
Correct. Okay. As a matter of fact, straight from the studio, I'm going down to report. And I could be picked up and put in a detention centre such as Brook House or Yarls Wood or Hammersworth at any moment in time, and be away from my family, which wouldn't be the first time it's happened either. Back in April, I was put in such...
And what's the next... where are your hopes pinned currently then?
My hopes are pinned on British public first and foremost, taking an interest in really, we've always been a country of, give people as many opportunities as possible, in life till they get it right. I've made one mistake my whole life, and I'll plead that, I'm not punished, and neither is my family punished for eternity twice, because I've already been punished through the criminal justice system, and now a second time, potentially. And also, I am also asking that people sign a petition, which is going live today.
How do we get in touch? How do we find out about that?
So that will be going live shortly after this program. A petition that basically will ask the Home Office to, like I said, temper justice with mercy.
Yes.
As a matter of fact, and we're also appealing directly to, the Home Secretary himself, Mr. Javid, who we are hoping will take a positive look at this and look at the facts of this case. I am no threat to society.